For those of you that seen Gonzo's video earlier, apologies, because this video is on the exact same article, the exact same topic as what Gonzo covered, but it's quite a big one. I think it's quite an important one. A large part of that depends on whether you believe what was written on Claret and Hugh or not. And I understand why a lot of people turn their nose up at that website. I, at times, are one of those people too. For a little bit of context, Gonzo has always got on with Hugh. He's worked with them plenty times in the past, still does to this day, helps them out a lot. He gets on really, really well with Hugh. Me, not so much. I don't like what the website do all the time. I disagree with what the website does a lot of time. However, I think they're very good at what they do. I just don't like what they do. And second of all, I think they've got really good sources. So when they put up information which has come from a top source, I believe it's come from a top source. And this is referred to David Sullivan. In the past, it might have referred to David Gold. It might refer to someone else in the boardroom at West Ham United. But this article is very much alluding that the quote has come from David Sullivan. And I believe it. The reason I'm providing that context is because I don't like Claret and Hugh, but I don't have to like Claret and Hugh in order to believe this information. And a lot of Gonzo's video is based on him believing it, and this video I'm doing right now is about me believing it, because I do believe it. And the quote is, David Moyes can't recruit the players he wants because they're deemed too old and expensive, while Steidten can't recruit because Moyes might not select his signings. It's a mess. I mean, you could say that again, the messy part. Now, Gonzo can be a bit more emotional than me. He'll be the first one to admit it, to be fair to him. He can be a little bit more, I guess, knee-jerk is the summary. But when it comes to topics like this, he can get a bit wound up a little bit more quicker than I can. But when I watched his videos the last couple of days regarding his concern with West Ham's transfer activity, I can't really disagree with him. I am getting concerned myself. I was probably worried. When the season finished and we announced that we're going to be selling Declan Rice, I was worried. When we announced we were going to be getting a technical director, basically someone in to oversee our transfer strategy going forward, I was worried. I was nervous. The reason I'm nervous is not because of Tim Steidten. It's not because of what he's done in the past. It's because of two men already at the football club. One is David Sullivan. How much control will he give to Tim Steidten? And the second one was David Moyes. Can he work under a technical director that he hasn't selected? There's a reason Rob Newman's job title was head of recruitment, because that's all he did. He was head of recruitment. Chief scout, essentially, is what Rob Newman does. Someone that David Moyes could control a little bit. But that's changed now. We've now got Mark Noble above David Moyes and now got Tim Steidten above David Moyes. How can Moyes operate under this? Two people coming in between him and David Sullivan in the space of 6 months. Noble come in and it all seemed a little bit well, although there was rumours that Mark Noble was unhappy after the January transfer window, that the fact we signed Danny Ings, an old Premier League experienced player, over Terem Moffi, a younger player from France who would have cost a similar amount of money. There were suggestions that Noble was upset, that he wasn't keen with the signing that we'd gone with. Regardless, whether you believe it or not, we now move on to Tim Steidten. He's come in now. And I've always had this worry, well, how's this going to work? How is David Moyes, a man with that over 1,000 games in the Premier League, over a decade of experience in the Premier League, who's a control freak? And he suggests he's a control freak. He's the one that suggests he likes to be in charge of everything. When he's done his podcasts over the last 12, 18 months, and he gets asked about struggles, what is his weakness in management? What's he struggled with in the modern game? He alludes to the fact that it's about communication, the new ways of communicating, new ways of managing players, about how players now have teams around them, how they prefer to go abroad for rehab, etc., etc. The game has evolved a lot. And you sense that Moyes perhaps doesn't like the way the game's evolved. And he does something, I agree with him in some regards. It's hard to disagree with him. But it's hard to disagree with someone that's done it for over a decade to change his ways just like that. Because unlike Ferguson, who stayed in the same job all this time, like Moyes did at Everton, Moyes has taken time out of the game. There's gaps in his resume. Hey, what's this gap in your CV all about, Mr. Moyes? He's got some of them. He's had to go away and evolve and come back to a different game from where he left it. But there's no evidence that he can work under a director of football, a technical director. There's evidence to suggest he cannot do that. He's suggested on WHUFC he doesn't like it when the chairman buys his player. He doesn't like it. It won't work, was his words. So what's the difference between a chairman buying a player and a technical director? Well, of course, a vast experience. Steidten is an expert in scouting and recruiting these players, which David Sullivan, I think it's fair to say it doesn't really have that level of expertise. So that is obviously the biggest difference. But that also requires a change of mindset from David Moyes. And I was worried that that would not come. So when this comes out, the one thing I will say, the one thing that's keeping me calm is time. There's still ages to go in the transfer window. I don't think we will sign many players. I think you can only get disappointed and angry when something happens you don't expect it to. I think when something happens exactly as you expected it, I think your disappointment's somewhat capped a little bit. I think it's easier to shrug and go, well, what did you think was going to happen? This was always going to happen. So I've always thought we will sign 4 players maybe this summer. I'd be surprised if it's more. I don't count Sean Moore, right? That's for the under-21s. 4 senior players. Let's say Borges, 2 midfielders, in a other position, a left-back perhaps. I'd be surprised if there's more. It depends on who's available towards the end of the window. Can we get someone in on loan, etc, etc. But I didn't expect mass changes. We can't have the manager complain about the quantity of transfers we had to do a year ago and then go make the same amount. We can't have the manager complain about lack of Premier League or suggest that buying players predominantly from abroad and coming in all in one go is a bad thing, then go do the same thing again. So there was always going to be something different this window, and I thought it was quantity, and I thought we might just turn our eye to Premier League experience a little bit more. Like I said, you don't have to agree with it. When I did the video the other day, I said David Moyes is the one that speaks for Premier League. You don't have to agree with him. It doesn't mean I agree with him. That's what Moyes says. So anyway, let's get back to it. So I expected only 4 signings. There's still over a month to go of the transfer window. Now, I know what you're away to say, and I'm going to say the same as you. Season gets underway in less than 3 weeks. We need signings now. We need signings ahead of that Bournemouth game. But just because you think that, just because I think that, it doesn't mean David Moyes thinks that. In fact, the evidence suggests that David Moyes appears relatively happy to wait until the end of the transfer window if he has to. That the club, while we're looking at the 11th of August thinking, hang on a minute, there's not long until this date, the season kicks off soon, the club might be looking at it going, we've got ages. We've got ages till the transfer deadline closes. The transfer window shuts. We've got over a month to bring in players. I wouldn't be surprised they're a lot more calmer. But that message from David Sullivan, it's a mess. That sounds a little bit tricky. Now, there's only one man I blame for this. And it's not David Moyes. It's David Sullivan. Because as soon as that season finished, David Sullivan had a decision to make. He had a manager entering the last year of his contract. And I hate it. Not David Moyes entering the last year of his contract. Any manager entering the last 12 months of their contract. I think it's a dangerous thing to do. Where is the long-term planning? What's the incentive for the manager to plan 3 seasons ahead? There isn't one. Why would he? Why would David Moyes plan for 2 seasons' time? He's not going to. He's planning for next season, and that is it. It's hard to blame David Moyes for wanting to bring in experienced players, not even Premier League, it's just experienced players that can walk into the starting 11 tomorrow. Why should he care? Why should David Moyes care about Polinia's potential resale value in 2 years' time? The fact that we could bring in Polinia and Ward-Prowse for 80 million and they're going to be worth 30 million between them in 3 seasons' time. Why should David Moyes care? David Moyes has got one aim: do well next season. That's it. That's his job at the minute. Keep West Ham up, hopefully win another cup. I don't know what his aims are. I'd imagine top 10 and win a trophy would be what David Moyes' ambitions are at West Ham next season. So what's he going to do this summer? Well, he's going to do everything he has to do to achieve that. What's Tim Steiden's ambition this summer? Maybe bring in a couple of players that are worth triple. So we pay 20 million, they're worth 60 million in 2 seasons' time? I don't know. Bring in a 20-year-old that in 3 seasons' time he's now first choice left back at West Ham. Emerson's now out the team, and the guy that we paid 8 million for is now the left back at West Ham. I don't know. But the ambitions of Tim Steidten is going to be a bit different to the ambitions of David Moyes in the transfer market now, because their situations are completely different. Their job spec is completely different. I don't blame David Moyes whatsoever. I blame David Sullivan completely for this, because he decided to let his manager continue with 1 year to go. Fine, I get it. Again, just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean you don't have to understand it. I get why David Sullivan's keeping David Moyes around. We've won the cup, we've stayed up. We finished 6th, then 7th. 3 seasons of European football in a row. On paper, it's justified as to why David Moyes stayed here. Again, doesn't mean I want to see David Moyes here. I would have preferred he left after we won the Conference League. I hoped he would, but I never believed he would. So when it was obvious David Moyes was staying, there was no disappointment, there was no anger. I thought it was obvious he was going to be staying here for the last year of his contract. Why wouldn't he? I struggled to see a reason why David Sullivan would dismiss David Moyes. But as soon as he brought in Tim Steidten, that there was a reason. There was your reason to dismiss David Moyes. Now, I know what you always say, the football wasn't great. I agree with that. That's why I wanted Moyes to leave. Does David Sullivan care about how the football's played on the pitch? I'd be surprised. I think he just cares about money coming into the club. Results. We're away from relegation. We've won a trophy now. David Sullivan owes David Moyes, I would suggest. But Tim Steidten, as soon as he arrived, this is where what Sullivan's done here, which is recruit Tim Steidten. It's a good move. But it's a bit, David Sullivan has caused these problems, by the way. Moyes and Steidten arguing, if that's true, that's on David Sullivan. Because Moyes is doing what he knows best, and Steidten is doing what he knows best. David Moyes is doing what he was brought to West Ham to do. Tim Steidten is trying to do what he was brought to West Ham to do. They're both doing what they have done in their whole careers. It's just that we've got a chairman that's employed chalk and cheese. He's employed a manager, an old school manager that likes to be in control. I get it. I completely understand. But he's only got a technical director that likes to oversee the recruitment of players. And he's expected them just to get on like that. It's absolutely insane. Now, you would expect conversations to have taken place between Sullivan and Moyes after the season when they have their meeting. This is something that should have been decided, which is we are bringing in a technical director and you have no say in transfers from now on. That is how that conversation should have went. But the fact that Moyes is able to sort of say, I want this player and that player, would suggest that that conversation never happened. That Moyes feels he's now still in control of the transfers. Tim Steiden's come in. That Carlos Borges, let's be honest with you, I've got absolutely no doubt that that's I would say Rob Newman. If I had to guess, I would suggest that Rob Newman's possibly recommended him, but I'd imagine it's been rubber stamped by Tim Steidten, possibly Mark Noble as well. I'd be shocked if David Moyes had anything to do with highlighting and purchasing Carlos Borges should he become a West Ham player. But Palhinha, that's got David Moyes' fingerprints all over it. Now, Tim Steidten, Palhinha was linked to Leverkusen a couple of seasons ago. So Tim Steidten, if you believe transfer rumours, was aware of him and tried to sign him when he was at Sporting. So it's maybe not as clear cut as it only being David Moyes that wants him. But the message from the chairman would suggest that that is what's happening at West Ham United. And this is on David Sullivan as far as I'm concerned. He should have sorted this. There should have been quite a clear policy as to who's buying the players. Who is the one in charge of these transfers at the minute? If it's not him, it's David Sullivan, put Mark Noble in charge if he has to. Allow Tim Steidten to make his case. Allow David Moyes to make his, and he decides. I don't know, but someone needs to take control of this situation. Now, like I said, this goes back to the very start. This is assuming all this is true. And while I don't like Claret and Hugh as a website, I do believe their sources. And this is what our top source is saying. I am praying, and I do it out of hope. No belief, just hope. I am praying that all this is just a blag. I am praying that David Sullivan is blagging this, and then he knows what he's doing by leaking this. He knows what he's doing by putting this out there to try and not wind up the fan base. I think West Ham have been guilty of that in the past almost, but just to try and throw everyone off the scent completely while we're working on stuff. Because this Carlos Borges thing, Sullivan's now admitted, we're close to signing the guy from Man City. There's been an update today from Fabrizio Romano saying it's pretty much done now. It's getting close. Sounds like he'll be our first signing, so that's good. But that's come from relatively nowhere. Expert employee mentioned him 6-7 weeks ago. But in terms of this negotiation taking place, it's gone from like nothing to advanced talks just like that. I like that. And that is what gives me hope, no belief, hope that there's a couple more of them happening. Because like I said, I think we only need 4. I think we'll only sign 4 different. And if we are only going to sign 4, which is my prediction, then that's 25% done. There's still a month to go in the transfer window, and we've got 3 to go. Now, the problem is the big one, which is defensive midfield. That's the problem. Palhinha looks like he's dislocated his arm, his shoulder for Fulham yesterday in a friendly, which could rule him out at the start of the season. Now that's going to be interesting, because if Palhinha was our number 1 target, and while I know that we've said we're not going to go in again, I wonder if Fulham are now thinking wish we accepted that one. Would West Ham, let's say we could get a deal agreed, are we going to put him through his medical even though he's injured at this present time? That's going to force our hand a little bit. It might actually do us, that injury to Palhinha might actually do Tim Steidten a favour here. Might do West Ham a favour. But at the same time, I've got no confidence in it happening. I've got worry. I'm very worried, because I was worried coming out of that season that should we sell Declan Rice, I had no confidence in us replacing Declan Rice. I'm still, by the way, what I will say, I'm still confident we will sign players. I'm still very confident that when the window closes, we will have signed 4, maybe 5 players at West Ham. It doesn't mean they'll be here for Bournemouth. It doesn't mean you'll like them. It doesn't mean I like them. It doesn't mean we'll spend 100 million. But I think we'll sign players that I think squad numbers will be fine by the end of the window. But, so while I'm confident we will replace Declan Rice, body, I'm not confident we're going to replace Declan Rice adequately or for good value. And that was before all this stuff's come out. And since all this stuff's come out last night, when David Sullivan says it's a mess, I think actually you caused it. You are the one that's caused this mess by bringing in Tim Steidten. If you wanted to go the technical director route, David Moyes should have been sorted, possibly dismissed so that you could then go down a different route. If you were sticking with David Moyes, what you could have done, or probably should have done, is not bother with the technical director, allow Newman and Moyes to continue what they were doing, and probably give him a new contract. Again, for the 5th time in this video, that's not what I want to see. I don't like doing these disclaimers, but a lot of people just assume what my opinion is in the comments. I don't like it. It's frustrating. I had it in the last video when I said about, like signing players and whatever, and so I said, oh, you're a big fan of signing Polina. And I never said I want to sign Polina. I said I get why David Moyes wants to sign Polina. It's 2 completely different things. I'm able to separate very easily what I want, what I predict, and what I think deserves. That's another one. So I think David Moyes deserves a new contract. I predict that he won't get a new contract. I would like to have seen him dismissed at the end of the season. It's 3 completely different things. It's 3 different things altogether. But what Sullivan should have done, in my opinion, is if he's decided that Moyes is the man he wants to go with, give him a new deal so that actually he can maybe plan for 2 or 3 seasons' time. Maybe, just maybe, Steidten might be able to have more influence if he had a manager on a 3-year contract. Maybe Moyes would say, okay, I'm okay with bringing in a left back who's going to be my first choice in 2 seasons' time. Maybe I'm okay with that. But Moyes won't play Steidten's players. Well, why should he? Why should David Moyes have Carlos Borges, very, very limited, completely inexperienced, full stop. Never mind at Premier League, just full stop. First team appearances, he's not experienced whatsoever. Why should David Moyes play him? Why should he not play Fornals or Ben Rama on the left? But if David Moyes was here in 2 or 3 seasons' time, there's your incentive, Gaffer, because in 2 or 3 seasons' time he might be one of the best left wingers in the league. Put him in and let's find out. We're in that position with Mubama at the minute. What we're going to do with him? Is Moyes going to play him? I can't bring myself to believe we will see Mubama much next season. And it's not because Mubama's not good enough. It's because I don't know where's the incentive for David Moyes to give him a go. Just like this window, what's the incentive for David Moyes to say to Steidten, you bring in all your youngsters and I'll play them all. David Moyes is worried about one thing, next season. And I find it hard to believe it, to blame him. But I'll tell you what, who I do blame, David Sullivan. He's right. It's a mess. And it's his mess, and he's the one that needs to sort it. Anyway, there you go. There's a little bit of a ramble for you. I'm concerned. I don't think we'll have many players here for Bournemouth. New signings. We might have 1 or 2 new signings before the Bournemouth game. But we're running out of time now, aren't we? Even if we were to sign them now, are they going to start against Bournemouth? We'll have to wait and see. I'm still confident we'll buy players before the transfer window closes. The problem is you're already 3-4 Premier League games into the season then. And we've seen last season what happens when you get off to a slow start. It can very quickly go from optimism to doom and gloom. Moyes needs to be careful because he's cheaper to sack right now. A lot cheaper. 2 of his coaches have gone. To sack David Moyes, all you've got to do is sack Billy McKinlay and Kevin Nolan as well. Alan Irvine can stay on. He's not around the training ground. He's a consultant. Just leave him where he is. They only need to sack 3 coaches, manager and 2 coaches. It's as cheap as it's ever been to sack David Moyes. But he won't. Sullivan won't. Because it's a mess of his own creating. Anyway, now I'm disappearing. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Catch up with you tomorrow.